Hey everyone, my name's Josh Bryan, and today I'm going to talk to you about the expectancy violation theory and all that it entails. So to sum this theory up, it basically has to deal with all the nonverbal messages that we're sending. It has to deal with the things that we may say without saying them at all, such as our body language, what our little bubbles are. If we're intruding someone's personal space and they feel uncomfortable with how close we are to them, they might act differently than what we think they should be acting at. Or same thing if we're far apart, it may give off a different vibe. And so the author that really researched this most, her name is Judy Burgoon, and she's a professor of communication, family studies, and human development. And she's received a ton of awards, but she's also authored and edited 14 books and over 300 articles. So the conflict I'm going to tell you about is one that I had with my roommate, and I'm pretty sure that all of us have had at least one roommate of some sort that we didn't really necessarily get along with. Mine was a lot different, I feel like, in the sense that we started out as really good friends. We actually spent a ton of time with each other at the start of the year and went on hikes, played football together, did all these things together. And then a couple months down the road, of course, we had, a run in here and there of how we lived differently, back home, and that showed when we were living together. But then those few conflicts, and far in between, turned into more and more disagreements. It seemed like it went from every month to once a week to every day. And so we started distancing away from each other. And these disagreements really were everything from doing the dishes a certain way or to where we were leaving stuff around the apartment. And it seemed like every single time we got a chance to pick each other apart, we took it. So to analyze this theory, this conflict, basically there are two competing needs that we each have. We all want to be affiliated and be friends and know people, and then there's also the need that we have of personal space, alone time. And if you know me, you would know that I like my bubble, as people say. We all have that little personal space around us that you don't really like people to come into. And I think that both of us were really similar in that way, that we were friendly, that we would talk to each other, but then as time went on, our bubble, whether we knew it or not, was starting to shrink, because we're living in a dorm room and there's that many people in it. So it's pretty difficult to be able to have your own personal space all the time. And I think that both of us had what we call a low threat threshold, which is basically defined as how big of a threshold you have when it comes to people invading it. And so because we had a low threat threshold, we didn't like people in our space no matter what. We weren't those types of people that were huggers or anything like that. And so it showed in our conflict. And then also there's what I call the territories, what the book calls the territories, of primary, secondary, and public territories. And so we both left stuff around the apartment sometimes, whether it was like shoes by the front door, or we put our backpack down on a chair, hung a coat over a chair, whatever it might be in the winter. And both of us, I think, were annoyed at the other person's territories, or what they claim to be territories, where we saw more of like a public territory. Like, move your shoes because they don't belong there. That's not where your stuff goes. Your stuff is in your room, or whatever it might be. And so really I think that's what mainly happened in our conflict is those three things: the competing needs, the threat thresholds, and then also the territories. So using this theory, there's a couple things that I would recommend if I could give myself, my past self, some advice, or anyone that's going through this topic or this struggle as well with a roommate, or maybe it's a sibling. There's a couple things I would recommend, and the first one I'd say is to understand, and basically meaning understand what their personal space is and how, if you're living in a dorm, it automatically shrinks. Like, a dorm is not very big, and you need to understand that you need to be considerate of other people and their space and what they assume is normal, what they assume is expected for this theory, the expectancy violations theory. And then you also need to recognize what their space is. So besides understanding it, you need to recognize and acknowledge that everyone does have that personal bubble and not everyone wants to share a space or wants to be this close with others. But then also we should communicate with others. I think a lot of struggles can be avoided if we communicate more freely and we really talk about what's bothering each other or what we could be doing different. And that would really solve, I think, most of our problems. In my case specifically, if we were able to understand what the other person was going through and recognize and respect their bubbles and their space, and then also communicate if things did need to change before it got taken out of proportion, that we were able to go and say, hey, if you could change this, or I'll work on this, but could you think about that, would really, I think, all truly help the situation in general. So to sum up and to conclude this presentation, basically this theory can help us make great connections. It says that in the book, and I think it's really important to realize that whatever we don't say, whether it's body language or in our own personal space, can really affect what kind of connections we make, which means that it can also destroy them if we're not careful. And then also remember that first impressions are important as we talk about expectancies and what it has to deal with, but also know that continuing to make an impression, a good impression, is just as important. Then also recognize everyone has a different expectation, but still be yourself. It's not wrong to be yourself by any means, but we also need to recognize that everyone has a different expectation of what we should be like, and everyone has a different, we have a different expectation of what everyone else should be like. So we should continue to remember that to help us get along with others.